Hey, you guys, this is part two to my Mary Cosby video I dropped this week. And this is me reading the Reddit about Mary Cosby that was written by a parishioner about the whole story from a parishioner's perspective of how Mary gained power in the church and about what it's like to be in her church. And it's pretty telling. Actually, we've seen a lot of behavior from Mary in season 2 towards the cast members of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City that's reflected in this Reddit. So it's further confirmation that this is, a lot of the stuff that Mary does, even with the cast members on the show, are tactics she uses in her church to scare her parishioners into doing what she wants. And it's going to make so much sense to you when I read this to you. But it's all in screenshots because it was deleted off Reddit, or it was. So I don't know how that works on Reddit, but at one point it was deleted. I don't know if someone maybe put it back up. I took screenshots of it. I'm reading from my screenshots. If it's still up there, go find it and read it. It'll probably be a smoother read than what I'm able to do reading from my little screenshots. And maybe some other people have it. And actually, see, I always take screenshots because people have a tendency to delete stuff. And so if you just link to it, it'll be gone next time you look, So anyway, I apologize in advance if it's choppy, but you'll get enough out of it to get the big picture. And please comment below after you hear it, so I can respond to some of the stuff. You're going to see a lot of things reflected in the show right now that are going to make a lot more sense to you. Okay, here we go. Let's do it. Oh, by the way, subscribe, like, and hit the notification button and my tip jar. Guys, so if you haven't heard the Mary Reddit that started at all, here it is. Okay, I'm going to read it to you. Okay, it starts with, most of my entire family was born into Faith Temple. That's Mary's church. What this article, and I am sure that Bravo will forget to mention, is that Mary had a husband before she married Bishop, 1 year after her grandma died. His name is Dana Harris. When Mary's grandma, Mama, died in 1997, Bishop would be preaching and telling all the women in the church that they better leave him alone and not try getting with him, that God already sent Mary Martha to comfort him in his time of mourning. He would be preaching this from the pulpit. They're talking about Robert Cosby, telling the church to quit gossiping and that she was, quote, strictly comforting him. He would go on and say her husband doesn't mind. Why do any of you? That's what Robert would say. He then shortly thereafter called Dana out in front of the entire church, telling the congregation that he was allowing Mary Martha to divorce Dana because Dana was forcing Mary Martha to perform unclean sex acts on him, aka oral sex. Then he immediately kicked Dana out of the church. This is Mary's first husband. Then he immediately kicked Dana out of the church. Shortly thereafter, the bishop called a family meeting with all of Mama's children, including Mary Martha's mom, Rosie Cazares. He told all of the family that he needed them to pray on something that God was telling him, and he wanted them all to pray to God. That he needed them to pray on something that God was telling him, and he wanted them all to pray to God and ask him for an answer, yes or no, without telling them what it was. It is also in Salt Lake City. Now she teaches that she is God too. More on that next. Okay, so Mary's mom says no in the Reddit. And then it goes on and it says, then with the approval of most of his late wife's children, he told them all that God was telling him and Mary Martha to get married. Hence, that is how Mary Martha married her step-granddaddy 1 year after her grandma died and became the first lady and co-pastor of Faith Temple Pentecostal churches. Her mom, Rosie, who was the choir director at the time, a job that Mary Martha would take over after she left, was not having the marriage of her daughter to her own stepdad. So her and her husband, Mark Cazares, tried to take the church and kick the bishop out. That's Robert. That failed, so they left the church and took over half of the congregation with her and started a new church called Mama's Faith Temple. Then it says, what Bravo will almost surely forget to mention as well is that Mary, Martha, and the bishop actively brainwashed their congregation into believing that they are God on earth, that God came down and has taken over their bodies, and that they are literally, that God came down and has taken over their bodies, and that they are literally the saviors of the earth alongside Jesus. They called the revelation. Before Mama died, it only pertained to her, but after she died, Mary and Bishop have taught that it is on them now. They have the church members running around yelling back and forth to each other, quote, Mary is God, and rolling around, speaking in tongues, going crazy over that nut job. Before Mary took over the church, the revelation was Mama is God, but now it's Mary is God, and the only way to be saved in the cult is the only way to be saved in that cult is to get that revelation and profess it at every chance you get. Let that sink in. They preach that she is God, they are cult leaders, and she is the head honcho of the whole damn operation. Mary and Bishop justify it by saying that you're not worshiping her, you're worshiping the God inside of her. That they have let God take up his abode in them to the extent where they don't exist anymore, and it's all God. People literally bow down and flail at her feet in church and worship them. If by chance you don't and are the odd man out, you are immediately targeted and called out by her in front of everyone, and the entire church will turn their back on you. You are told that you are an unbeliever and aren't saved. You become an outcast. There is an internet broadcast of the church's sermons that 10 a.m. Mountain Time and now 10 p.m. as well. They're talking about the time it goes on the radio. Up until Bravo really started getting going with Mary's cast membership, they would play clips of Mary claiming she has the keys to the kingdom and preaching to the effect that she was God incarnate. They would also edit clips of the old pastor Mama preaching and Mary preaching intermittently so that Mama would be preaching half a sentence and they would cut to Mary finishing it. Half the time you would get confused if you were listening to Mama or her for short bursts. This is a classic manipulation technique to back up their claim that the revelation had been passed on to Mary and she is now the Word of God. I've noticed that over the last few months, they put a halt to that and are strictly playing Mama's sermons, and twice a day at that. Also, because church members aren't being barraged, beat up, belittled, and brainwashed in person every Sunday anymore with COVID, so they are picking at straws, trying to hold on to the last stick with it till the end. Members and their paychecks got to keep that money coming in. Mary and Bishop demand that all the church cult members have their cell phones on them 24/7 to be at their beck and call, and if they do not answer when they call, they are silenced and ridiculed and humiliated in church. Remember, Whitney didn't answer the phone and Mary flipped the fuck out and we were all like, why is that happening? It's part of her cult methodology. Members are not allowed to date or marry without the explicit approval of Mary and the bishop. Then they decide who they can date, marry. They are forbidden something about the church. They are not allowed to have internet access or go to the movies, etc. It continues that, you're required to confess any sins that they believe they commit to Mary and Bishop and suffer the consequences of their judgment. They control every aspect of their flock's lives, mind control to the extreme. Let me also say this, Mary looks nothing like she did just a few short years ago. Her and Bishop disappeared from the church for almost 3 years. All that time while they were gone, Bishop was calling into the church during the church meeting saying she was in New York in the hospital on her deathbed with the same kind of huge boils that afflicted her grandmother and that they needed hundreds of thousands of dollars to perform the life-saving surgery she had so she wouldn't die. Finally, after those 3 years of further draining their congregation on their money, Mary showed up. So she's making fun of them in couture and they're wearing Ross. Or that she's making fun of them for wearing like low-end clothing and she's using their money to buy couture. I mean, then it goes on. What a mind fuck. When you're too poor to buy anything because your pastor has you on some whack belief that she is God on earth, forces you to give her most of the money that you make, and then makes fun of you for coming to church dressed in the best thing that you can afford, and says you have a jealous demon against her in your heart. Actually happened, by the way. Jeez. Some will say that Faith Temple has always been a cult. Some will say it became one after Mary Martha's grandma, Mama, died, and Bishop and Mary took over. I guess that is up for debate. There's one thing that is for sure now, though, and that is that Faith Temple, as it stands today, is absolutely 100% a cult, and Mary Martha Cosby is the ringleader that terrorizes its members. And if you don't do what Mary says, it says that the members are threatened with eternal damnation. If they so much as look at her in a way she sees unpleasant, her and the bishop are single-handedly responsible for ruining countless lives and tearing families apart with their ministry of evil. And I personally hope that the world sees her for what she is when this airs, that she is exposed for the fraud that she is, and that everyone gets privy to the fact that she is deceitful, homophobic, bigot, criminal that brainwashes her congregation into believing that she is God on earth. Ask any past member. They'll all back this up with mirroring experiences. The reason why so many people have not spoken out yet is because they are God-fearing, genuinely good people whose lives literally been turned upside down. They're also afraid of losing their church friends and family and loved ones. I was for the longest time too, and will probably do so for this, but not anymore. If she is going to be as bold as she is thinking she can put on a fake facade to the whole world about who she is, I know thousands of others ex-members are here to stand up to that BS. Oh, and one final thing. She wasn't forced into marrying anybody. I'd be surprised if her and Bishop weren't screwing before Mama died. I can't prove it, but I would definitely be surprised. And you can be damn sure that her grandmother is going to whoop her naughty little butt before she burns in hell for all the lives she's ruined and the wicked acts she's committed. No filter needed on this one, right? I think it would take away from this person's testimony of what it was like to be in Mary's church and what this person's experience with how Mary came about taking over her grandmother's church from the perspective of a parishioner. There has been ample evidence that we've seen on Salt Lake City season 2 that resembles what this woman or what this man is describing in this Reddit. To know that they're not lying. Actually, we've seen Mary duplicate behavior in this Reddit on the show to cast members in an effort to control them. So I absolutely believe this Reddit. The Reddit, I believe, was taken by a few different people and screenshot. I screenshotted it. That's why it's so hard for me to read. But, I remember at the time the Reddit was deleted, but I'm sure maybe someone put it back up again. I don't know how that works. But on my Instagram, I wrote it's been deleted because it was. So they must, if it's back up, great. You guys could go read it easier than what I just did. If it's still deleted, then I have a copy of it. But it's a screenshots of like 19 screenshots, which is why I was struggling to read it to you. And I'm sure some other people have it too. But anyway, I wanted you to hear it now after this episode that we just had this week. And I need you guys to know the truth, or what I believe the truth to be. So that, you're not falling for this woman's bullshit on the show. Because I again, as I said in my first video, I have to sleep at night knowing that this woman has a platform and it's dangerous.